I just want to call the Charter and Rules Committee to order. I'm Terry Murphy. I'm the Ward 2 Councilor and the Chairman. With me is Linda Vacan, the Ward 5 City Councilor. Also with us is City Councilor at Large Rebecca Lisi, Ward 3 Councilor David Bartley, Councilor at Large Michael Sullivan, Councilor at Large Joseph McGiverin. I don't know. First, I'd like to take up the first item on the agenda.
Motion to take up item 1.
All right, so moved.
All in favor?
First item, all in favor?
Aye.
First item on the agenda is introduced by Councilor McGiverin, ordered that the following ballot question and the summary be placed on the ballot for the special election on April 30th, 2019, or another date voted on by the City Council. The ballot question, shall the City of Holyoke be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2.5, so-called the amounts required to pay for the bond issue in order to build 2 middle schools in the City of Holyoke, yes or no? And then there will not be a summary question based on communications we've had. I do want to start off, I got an email this afternoon, and it's from the city solicitor. So I want to read that to start off to make sure we're all on the same page. And Councilor McGee, the City Council President, also in the committee, and Ward 7 Councilor. From the City Solicitor, we have a specific language for our ballot question for City Council that needs to be done rather than what is on the agenda for tonight. This is the first I have heard of this. The Council will be voting, as I mentioned in my letter to Council, on the bond contingent on Council then voting to place it on the ballot. Ideally, you can discuss tonight, but there will be a separate, accurate order coming before Council soon. We are waiting on the details to be completed before submitting to the full Council. And I'm not quite sure from the City Solicitor.
I thought she submitted the full language. No.
This is what I just got today. Yep.
Aside from
Councilman
that, I
McGee?
know we have Cinder here.
Yep,
And
yep.
we asked her to stay.
Yep.
She's got a drive ahead of her. So we asked if she'd stay for this meeting to get her up front and then just as a reminder.
Yeah, no problem. Senator, if you want to come back in. Okay, hi, Abby.
And Mr. Chair, we're going to release Cinder and Abby before this meeting is over, correct?
Oh, right.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just going
Well, that depends.
to present.
I told you, we've never met before. So, I've asked you some questions as we've gotten through things, and a few of the questions I'd like to ask, and then I'll certainly open up to the rest of the council to ask you any questions or to ask you to make a presentation. I know you've talked about a debt exclusion as being, if not the only way, certainly one of the ways that this could be done. And I sent you some questions, and I know you did indicate that it would be tight in the city. It's up to the city whether they could do certain things. But one of the questions I asked is, if we did $56 million of bonding, how much of that could the city bond under the regular city budget without going to an exclusion?
You need to turn the mic on. The screen.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Okay, now it's on. So we did take a look at that. So the city, the way you construct your debt is equal principal or level debt service, like a mortgage payment. So every payment is approximately equal for every year of the bond. Versus equal principal, you pay the largest amount of debt in year one, and then it declines every year thereafter. We took a look at that with next to existing debt under the lower levy limit of Prop 2.5. And then we took, which is what all your debt is, we look at all the existing amortization of debt service in the general fund. And then we added on what we think is a structure associated with the city's with about 5 million of debt that the city is planning on, that we knew about, that the city was planning, but the city has actually also authorized some additional debt since then. Just looking at the 5 million on top of existing debt, it left around, depending upon how you structured new debt, possibly the ability to sell about $2 or $3 million worth of additional bonds, but the city's already authorized probably another, I think I've got the city's authorized unissued debt here, probably another $15 million worth of bonds that are currently on its books. So I would say that you don't have any capacity right now to issue any additional debt besides what you've been authorizing under the lower limit of Prop 2.5. And that to think about doing something like a 50, we ran numbers based on 50 million, but we don't think there's any opportunity to put that inside Prop 2.5.
Okay, so you don't think...
But I would leave it to the city to tell me, how can you cut $3 million from your budget or raise $3 million more in revenue, fines, fees, whatever, that would free up money to avoid a debt exclusion. I mean, it's not really for us to answer that, but when we look at it, we don't see that there's any kind of budget, flexibility to do something like that.
So right now, if we had other issues coming up, if I'm hearing you correctly, we don't have the ability to bond for those either.
Well, you have to, just like what happens with a capital plan, you'd have to prioritize and take a look at what's your first priority. Do you have that gas bar right there? Thanks. Yeah, currently on the city's, the city most recently authorized in December, well, that's all water. So the city just authorized 2.6 million in September of 18, 2.6 million fire department vehicles. In September of 18, 420,000 traffic signals design. And at the same time, another $1.4 million for traffic signal replacement. So right there in the general fund, you're talking about $1.4 million, $1.8 million, $2 million, $4 million, $4.2 million of new authorizations in September. And then you've got water and sewer, but that's not related. But you already have school boiler money and window replacement that you're working on. That fits into the general fund. You've got the school feasibility study that would ultimately fit in with the debt exclusions probably. The pool reconstruction, 300,000. You've got a couple other minor projects. So there's not really, with the existing debt, it doesn't amortize fast enough to take on more than, even based on level debt, which is a slower structure, probably about 2 or 3 million. You've already got that here. So, you're going to have to time this and fit this into the regular budget and see how it plays out. There might be room to do a little bit more, but, it's not anything that would be significant that would offset the cost of 1 or 2 schools.
Okay, so let me ask, my other question to you was, if we were to do a debt exclusion for our current general and school bonding, starting in FY '22, where the total for that is 3.6 million, and it goes down to 3.5, 3.4, 3.2, 3.1, and works its way down to eventually being 0, would that put us in a position where we could have the school construction bonding in our regular budget and have those bonds taken out of our regular budget and in effect be paying, the school bond would still go on for 30 years and would be part of our city budget for the 30 years without an exclusion. The debt exclusion for those bonds would be eliminated in 2035.
Well,
Were you able to look at that?
We did look at that. Well, I thought about it. I didn't look too hard at it because I'm not sure it gets you where you want to go. I mean, with declining debt service, that allows you under the lower levy limit of Prop 2.5 to kind of manage what you need to get done other than the school construction project. I think with the school construction and I don't know that, and you've got about, I think that when I looked at it, you've got like, I think it was 30 million, hold on, let me. you don't have enough of existing debt to amortize to cover the cost of what you're trying to do with the school project. I think, here it is. So existing non-exempt general fund debt service. So you've got right now on your books almost $46 million of principal and interest be payable between fiscal 19, which we're in, through 2035. And it does decline each year, but it's not, for some of the years, it would have the cost of what a school project might be. But then what are you going to do where it's 2.4 million if the school project is still $3 million? And I wasn't sure why you would swap out existing debt for a like amount of, well, what you need is more of cost for, so let's just say you need 50 million. This 47 million represents, let me just tell you, $36 million of principal. So you'd be swapping out 36 million of principal plus the interest on that, and as a debt exclusion, which is 47 million, for 50 million, and the interest on that is probably 20 or 30 million. So I'm not quite sure how you fit that inside the lower levy limit of Prop 2.5 as you go forward, the cost of the schools. I don't think it can be done without really constraining the city.
Let me try to make sure I understand here. So, I mean, the reason I'm looking at doing this is to try to keep the overall tax above the Proposition 2.5 limit to as minimal number as possible. So if we did a debt exclusion on those aspects, the 3.6 million that I'm talking about when the schools would be coming due would be opposed to the schools 3.7. So in effect, that year would be a wash. Yes?
Well,
If I did a debt exclusion for these, it was going to be 3.6, and the schools would be 3.6 or 3.7.
if you do a debt exclusion, you don't have to, I'm not sure why you would mess with the existing debt. You can mess with the new school project cost. You don't have to debt exclude the whole thing. You could debt exclude some amount. But I think that if you're taking a look at what people want to vote for, to pay extra taxes for, it's probably schools. It's probably not, I don't know, but it's probably not, the traffic signal. Would I vote for a school or would I vote for a traffic signal first? I probably would want to vote for the school. And if you want to reduce the cost of the school, you can spread it out. But what you find if you spread it out, and I thought your questions, you asked what happens if it's 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and we did run numbers like that, and it's actually quite telling. And it was an interesting, because we ran it with a 0.5% difference between 20 years, 25, and 30. Right now, in today's market, and you're not doing this now, if you did this now, you'd save a ton of money on the project. But you're not ready to do it yet, you're not ready to borrow it yet, but if rates stay as low as they are, you could save a lot more money than what we're showing you as the net cost of this. We made assumptions that 20-year debt, when you would issue this debt in 2021, would be 4%. And 25-year debt would be 4.5%, and 30-year debt would be 5%. Currently, 30-year debt is closer to 3.5%. So that's a huge savings on if the sooner the city could do something like this. But we ran it, and I think the numbers are really palatable, and I think there's a really compelling argument for the shorter term level debt. And I'd like to show it to you because I think that it's an amazing amount to. It's very interesting. Discussion, and I would.
Do you have a handout for that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I would have sent it sooner, but we just finished part of it today because what we did was no, you can have that. But what we did was we ran. I want to just tell you what we did before I pass it out because I don't want you to look at it until after. Well, I want to look at it together. We ran it 50 million for 20, 25, and 30 years, equal principal and level debt. So everybody understands equal principal is declining debt service, so you get the biggest impact up front, biggest tax impact, onerous, more onerous, than level debt. Level debt, like a lease payment or a mortgage payment, is less, but it's equal throughout. It costs a little bit more interest because you're paying off principal slower. Principal is actually slightly ascending each year, and interest is declining. Whereas with equal principal, principal is equal, interest is declining, so you're hit up front with the largest payments. We then did 27 million, which you asked us to do. Same thing, equal principal and level debt. And then we did a summary, a single-page summary. So I'd like to pass out this 50 million.
Can I ask?
Did you give one?
Councilor Bacon? Councilor
Can
Bacon?
we also get a copy of the spreadsheet showing all the debt that you referred to?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Because you referred to $15 million of debt that are already that has been authorized, and we haven't seen the budget impact of that yet. And Mike,
haven't seen the budget impact of that yet either, because
Okay.
it's brand new. We haven't modeled that yet.
okay,
But I can give you a copy of what the existing debt service is of the city that makes up its general fund outstanding debt as of June 30, 18.
okay, thank you.
I only have one.
Yeah, I'll take it, I'll get you a copy, we'll get copies.
Yeah, if you want it back.
So that's,
Okay,
we've got this all on our computers. This is principal, this is interest, this is total, this is what it's.
and that's for the current, but not taking into account yet what
What's
we'll be
coming.
hearing report on from our auditor on the new debt and the effect of
That
it.
doesn't include any of the debt that's been authorized but not yet sold.
It's since the end of 2018?
On the books right now.
Okay.
Right
Okay.
now, as
So
of right
None
now.
of that's been actually
Yeah.
bonded for you?
That has not yet been bonded, correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the document that we just passed out, the first page is 20 years, 50 million. We just did 50 million. I didn't do 56, but it could be, it would be a little bit more for 56, spread out. Wouldn't probably not be so much, but 50 million, you can see that with, the first page assumes equal principal. We assumed 4%. 20 years right now would probably be under 3%. But at 20 years, because we're looking at 2021 as the dated date of these bonds, and I think any prior information we passed out was at 2021 as the dated date of bonds, just for purposes of discussion. There are options with regard to how this could get structured, but if you push this out as far as you can with short-term borrowing and that kind of thing, you might get into an interest rate environment that's much higher, because the assumption is that things could, that the economy could falter even more, but there's also the assumption that at some point interest rates will go up. Right now, if we assume that 30-year debt, it's in the last 30 year debt at 6.5% was considered good. And now that would be considered terrible. So just so you know, on the first page, this is equal principal, 20 years, and you can see the fiscal total at 4%, 20 years, equal principal is 4.5 million, and it declines down over time. That's the third column from the right. That's principal and interest is 4.5 million in year one, and then it declines over 20 years down to 2.6 million. That tax impact in year one for residents is $1.61 per $1,000 of assessed value, $3.33 per $1,000 assessed value for commercial right now. That declines down to, at the bottom, you can see what it does. The $1.61 declines down to 93 cents, and the $3.33 declines down to $1.92. Total interest, based on the way this principal is amortizing, is in column 3. The bottom number in column 3 is $21 million of interest on $50 million of principal. So if you go to page 2, we did it level debt like a mortgage, the exact same thing, 20 years, assuming 4%. Level debt, you can see in column 3, raises the total interest cost to 23 million from 20 million, but that's an extra 3 million over 20 years, so it's not that significant. What it does is it takes the tax impact for residents down from $1.60 to $1.30, and for commercial to $2.72. So that $1.30 over 20 years is, so if that's per thousand, so per 100,000 of assessed value, it would be $132 in a year. For a $200,000 home, it would be $260 in a year. Divide that by 12. That's really not very much. I know, easy for me to say, but it's really not very much, I don't think, even for anybody, but hopefully, maybe not, maybe, but if it is, take a look at the next page. This one goes out 25 years, but if you're gonna go out longer, the interest rate goes up. So we assumed, like I said, a 50 basis point, 0.5% differential between 20 years and 25 years. Even though today's market, it's only 25 basis points, it's 0.25%. So if today's market, you could borrow 20-year debt at 3.25, you could borrow 25-year debt at 3.5. And those are conservative rates. But using this at 4.5%, you can see we did equal principal again. It starts at 20, stretching it out. Look at the second column from the right. It starts at $1.52, and it goes down to 75 cents for residential in year 25. And for commercial, it starts at $3.14 per $1,000 of assessed value, and it drops down to $1.55 by year 25. This interest cost in year 3 at the bottom, in 25 years, the total interest cost to stretch it out 5 years goes from $21 million to $29 million. So it's an extra $8 million to stretch it out that much longer based on these numbers. So that's an interesting thing, whereas the impact, and go to level debt, because I think that's an easier one. I mean, from our perspective, with debt exclusions, level debt makes more sense than equal principal. It spreads the cost over the entire life of the bond. Everybody pays a fair share, the people that are living here in 10 years and 15 years for the projects, as opposed to just the people in the first 5 years paying more. It spreads it out. So if you compare our level debt, which is that fourth page in, 25 years at 4.5%, total interest there is $34 million. It increases it a little bit more, but it brings it down to $1.21 spread out. So the level debt on page 2 for 20 years was $1.32. To go to 25 years, level debt takes it to $1.21. It increases the debt, the interest cost from $23 million to $34 million. So it's almost another $11 million to stretch it out that 5 years. So instead of the impact being on page 2 for a $200,000 home of $260 over a 12-month period, it lowers it to $240 over a 12-month period. So it's only dropping it by $20 over 12 months, but it's costing an extra $11 million over 25 years. So I think that that's pretty interesting. The third one is 30 years, and we ran it at 5%. And that's what we're pretty much running, anything at 5%. Now, you all can make assumptions about whether or not the rates will be lower than that, but there you can see it brings it down from, I forget the equal, you can see the equal principal. It starts at $1.49 residential and $3.08 commercial. It goes down to 83 cents and $1.29. The level debt is the one I think that's more interesting. It takes it from that $1.61 down, was it wasn't $1.61. It takes it from the $1.32 on page 2. It takes it to $1.16. So instead, it's a $232 in a year, every year for 30 years, as opposed to $260. So $230 versus $260, an extra $30. But here, you can see on the last page, interest is now $47 million versus on page 2, $23 million. So what we did was, and I'll show you, do you have the summary? The summary. We'll start with the, and we'll pass out all this. So we summarized all that, so you can look at it on a single page without having to look at all these pages. It's a lot of food for thought. And we also then ran 27 million, so you can see that. But before we go on to the 27 million, I thought that it might be useful to just take a look at this summary page because, and the 27 million is summarized on here as well. We can pass out the detail of the 27 million. That's the 50 million. Did you get a copy of the 27 million? No, it's 27 million.
Okay, thank you. just gave out, this is for $27 million for one school that I asked for. Did you get one? Cindy, did you get for one?
Did you get one of these? No.
Oh, you gave it to her?
Did you get the summary page, though? Here.
Yes, this, thank you.
So now you have everything we brought. So the 27 million, which shows the breakout here also, 20, 25, and 30 years. You can see what that's doing. It's summarized on this summary page as to how much less that would be in terms of the impact. These impacts are per $1,000. The average house, the average residential value right now, I think, is 208,000, was it something like that? So 205. So it's easy enough for me to think in terms of 200,000. So per 100,000, these are, you know, you can see it, for level debt, which is the second number down under the 50 million, the $1.32 becomes $132 per $100,000 of value. If you've got a $300,000 home, it would be 3 times that. If it's a $200,000, which is the average value, it would be approximately $260 a year. And you can work down. I would take the second number on each one, the level debt number for 25 years and the 30-year level debt. I think when you go through this process of looking at all these different kinds of options, 20, 25, 30, equal principal versus level debt, you know, unless there was going to be another debt exclusion ever, there's not really a good reason not to do level debt and not layer it on unless you were going to add on more later that you wanted to fit in. Kind of like what you were saying about if there was room inside the lower levy limit to just, since debt is falling off, but you've already kind of got a plan that's dealing with that. When you've got these large projects, and Holyoke's not alone, almost everybody in the state is having to, whether it's a new police fire station or whether or not, these big projects don't really fit under the lower levy limit unless, you know, you've had extreme growth. So that's as much as we put together. It's really meant for food for thought. We don't, but it's interesting when you look at 30 years level debt versus 20 years level debt, how much additional interest costs, and it's not that much additional money to shorten up the loan to the 20 years. So from our perspective, it was a very interesting exercise, and it's, what's even more interesting is that the rates right now would be 3.25%, 3.5%, and 3.75%, maybe even better than that. And that would bring these numbers down even much further. So I'm not sure that the idea of a debt exclusion should be so frightening. I mean, I think it's an opportunity with this low rate environment, and hopefully it'll stay low. I mean, this is better than it's been in, you know, we've been having this declining rate environment. We've already refunded all sorts of outstanding debt. The federal government eliminated our ability to do a lot of that refunding because they felt like it was cutting into their money. And, you know, now rates have been coming down steadily since January. I don't think anybody thought they were going to keep coming down. And now the idea is that the feds probably won't raise rates, maybe no more rate increases this year. Some people are saying no rate increases next year if there's a recession at some point. You know, bad news for the economy is good news for the city to borrow. And, you know, so this is, you know, if the city wanted to see what this looked like with real current rates and what the difference is. I mean, I think the part of what the public needs to understand is this is an opportunity with rates this low. If rates went back up, the city has the opportunity to issue 50 or whatever the dollar amount is over time. I mean, you obviously have to use short-term notes to fund the construction project for any of these. So you have to have the cash to do the project. So you have to borrow either short-term or long-term. But, you know, there's combinations and you could push all this out. But the problem with pushing everything out, and what we've seen is a lot of acceleration of debt because of these low rates. And these are low, but they're even lower than this right now. But you could push it way out. You know, if it's a 2 or 3 year construction project between the two projects and the state's giving you the aid they're giving you, you could basically spend all the state aid first and keep rolling any money you needed to add to that to meet the construction cost.
Could I just ask?
Short-term basis.
And first of all, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you, when you get back and you have a little break, if you could go to the $56 to $58 million range and do the same kind of thing.
Yep.
And then I'm going to open it up for questions. So, Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. Thanks for making everything so really easy to understand. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with, my first question is, when do we actually debt exclude? So is it in the moment that we vote and we pass the debt exclusion, or is it going to be on the completion of the construction of the school? So like, when are we able to actually capture these rates? Like, when do we actually debt exclude?
You would want, from our perspective, you would want to authorize the debt contingent on a debt exclusion. So you don't basically, you back to the drawing table. If the public doesn't want the debt exclusion, then maybe you don't do the schools, or maybe you do. I don't know what you do at that point. Because I don't think that, my own perspective is that the city really doesn't have the capacity to do the schools inside the lower levy limit. So you would authorize the debt contingent on a debt exclusion, and then I think you've got a certain amount of time, I have to check what it is, to put the vote out, put the ballot out to the public on the debt exclusion component. So the city council would vote the project contingent on a debt exclusion. The ballot would go out there. If it was voted, you'd be simultaneously working with you are already working with the MSBA. I'm not quite sure what the status of that is, if they've actually approved the projects. So once that's approved and you know that their money is available, and the vote itself would coordinate with what's going on with MSBA right now. Mm-hmm. And it would state, you'd authorize a certain amount to be reduced by the lesser of what the percent grant money that they're giving you, or whatever amount they're giving you, or 56% or whatever. What is the percentage you're getting on this?
It's roughly
57,
58%.
58.
Okay, that's what I thought. So whatever the actual percentage is in the information that's going back and forth. So you have to, this gets coordinated with them. They want to see that loan order, and then bond counsel would review the loan order also, and it would have a contingency in there. It would have something else in there that would allow you to, secure the debt with the intercept of the city state aid and do things like that. That would get you a program AA rating. You'd go to market like a AA, and then you could. And then you take a look at the timing of the project. You would probably only borrow what you need as you need it. I mean, if this is a 2-year project, these bonds might be done in pieces. We'd have to take a look at what the opportunity is and what the cost is, and we'd get into it. I mean, one of the things about this is these are estimates, and it's really important not to assume that this is exactly how you'd issue the debt. Mm-hmm. You might say, if rates change or rates go up, or there's something, the project is delayed, you wouldn't necessarily issue debt before you need to have it. You would want to take advantage of rates. So you're always thinking about the whole picture. So, you have to take a look at it. This is, you might decide, well, we want to use bands for 2 years, and then we'll sell the bonds. We think that rates are going to stay low, or, whatever. But you would have the cash you'd get the cash to meet the cash flow requirements of the project, but you can't do that till you authorize the bonds, get the debt exclusion, satisfy legal requirements to show that it was properly authorized and that it's tax exempt. And then you could go ahead and borrow. You'd have to get a rating, and then you advertise the sale of bonds or notes, and you go forward from there and get your money to do what you want to do.
So you just prompted a second question, but I might sidebar that. So you said we would be able to achieve a AA rating.
Right.
Can we come back to that later? Because
Sure.
I want to keep asking about. So I do think of the way I've been thinking this is as a mortgage payment with let me get my notes here. So level debt,
Yeah.
the same amount that we're paying every year. But in my household, there are times where we are able to make a double payment, for example, and over the course of time, we're going to be able to bring down the entire sum of what we owe down because we're making more payments along the way. Can the city, through whatever means, find ways of helping to pay down the total sum of the debt so that perhaps even if we're paying this fixed rate over 30 years, we'd be able to knock down the number of years, or even, no, I think that's good for now.
So typically, in the bond market, only the bonds callable after a certain time are able to be prepaid. So that would be, let's say, anything after year 9. So that would be a 9-year call, or 10. It was 10. It's been shortened to 9. I won't get into it. Anything after year 9. But the way the bonds get prepaid, for one, you can't do it until year 9. And you can only do it, if you had the money to prepay all or part of any maturity, you have to pay it from the year 30, has to be prepaid before year 29,
Okay.
before year 28. And it's the same thing with the mortgage. When you prepay, when you throw extra whatever amount of money at a mortgage payment,
Yep.
it's shortening the loan. But you might not want to do that when the loan is if the loan is at such a low rate. I mean, these are,
And we wouldn't want to do that
might
because
be
it
like
gives
free
us-
money in the future for taxpayers too. I mean, the money, where would the money come from to do that? If the city had the wherewithal, it had all this new growth and all these, something happened, and the city wanted to do that, I think that where there's a will, there's a way to prepay that. But I'm sure property taxpayers aren't going to want to, property taxpayers can't just do that.
Oh, no, it would be
It would
the
have-
city making those larger
It
payments.
would have to be the city, and I'd have to check into how it would accomplish that, but probably where there's a will, there's a way, yeah. You just take a vote to do something like that.
Okay, and then can we go back to the AA, or like how actually voting for something like a debt exclusion would help us gain a greater bond rating than what we're currently enjoying today?
Well, that's not what does it. What does it is, there's a program called the State Qualified Bond Act program, which allows the city to, with permission from the Municipal Finance Oversight Board, get permission to pledge, so the city gets a state aid every month at this point. Your state aid is coming in monthly. It used to come in quarterly. You get a lot of state aid. City is, heavily reliant on the state aid, and you get a lot of state aid. You can have the state intercept your state aid payment to pay bondholders directly, and the rating agencies have given that program a AA rating. The underlying rating of the city would stay the same as what it is now.
So
But
it's just-
but the bonds themselves would be, it's like, prior to the recession, bond insurers did some of this kind of thing. They charge for it. And the State Qualified Bond Act program allows the city to do it for itself by using its own state aid to secure the debt. But you're not really using the state aid it's the cash of the state aid that's being intercepted to pay the bondholder. It's not really, the state aid's not being permanently intercepted for this purpose. The city's taxing the debt service that's due on the bonds, and then you don't need what you taxed, the collection, to pay the debt service, because the state intercepted your state aid, so it's a wash at the end of the fiscal year. But it gets a program rating of AA by one notch below the state.
Great, thank you so much.
But it's your state aid, and it's just adding to the GO. The general obligation credit is now getting further secured with belts and suspenders, basically.
Councilors, anybody? Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you. So I'd like to go back just a little bit to what we talked about in the previous meeting. When we're talking about putting something on the ballot, and the residents can vote, the homeowners can vote for an increase for themselves for the school, but they're also voting for an increase in the commercial tax rate, all right? And the problem I've got with this is for just even one particular business in Holyoke, this would be a $345,000 increase in the amount of taxes they pay. So in effect, this is a huge portion, 10% of the annual cost of the bond going to one business. So I've got to get back to the question is, what you mentioned was we can do a shift, but if we talk about doing a shift, now we're talking about, in reality, trying to do two things: present the taxpayers with one scenario and then change it later on to protect the businesses. I mean, something like this could have a catastrophic effect on the commercial climate in the city. Am I missing something here?
I don't know that it would be catastrophic, but the city would know if it's catastrophic. If that one commercial taxpayer is going to leave on account of it, then that's a big deal. That would be a big loss. And the city needs to consider that and evaluate that. And if so, then then it would need to, that might be unique to Holyoke. That's not sort of, but there's a sensitivity that all municipalities have to the impact on the commercial base versus the impact on the residential base. if it, in essence, the commercial base is, subsidizing the residential base to some extent, and that needs to be shifted back some to the residential base in connection with this, then the impact would be a little greater than this. I mean, I'm talking about, $260 for a resident over, and that's the 20-year scenario, I think it was, whatever it was, divided by 12, maybe it's going to be a little higher. But when I think, I start thinking about this in terms of, a TV bill or a phone bill or whatever, and you're talking about 2 brand new schools. I mean, I don't know if it comes down to, again, priorities, but the shift, if the city would have to evaluate that, that's not really something that we can, based on what the commercial rate is, we can show you the impact, but we don't have anything to do with what makes sense with regard to a commercial rate versus the shifting there of multiple tax rates and who pays what.
Right. Well, it's something I wanted to get out here in front of the public tonight, Mr. Chairman. We've got, I mean, this is, as Senator just said, a lot of times the commercial rates supporting the residential rate. I think we've gotten a long way down the road away from that, unlike other cities. We've seen nothing over the last 30 years but an erosion in our commercial base, to the point now where just the loss, as we had with the Mount Tom power plant, just the loss of one severely affected us over the long term. We're still trying to recover from that. The loss of another like this, or this kind of an impact on one business, I think this is something we have to take into consideration also, what this could do and also what it does to our overall tax rate. This alone, we talk about doing $2.72. Doesn't sound like much, but without a doubt now, this gives us the highest commercial tax rate in the Commonwealth, bar none, way above anybody else.
Sounds like something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had the same kind of conversations, that it does have a potential impact. And again, our function as we're doing this, and the reason it's before the city council as the appropriating authority, is that we've got to balance what the needs of the community are and the economic ability of the community to pay. So, I mean, that's something we've all been dealing with, and I'm sure we've been getting thoughts, comments from both sides on the issue, and I will say all have been respectful, so I appreciate that. Any other councilors wanted to talk, ask Cindy or anything? We're good.
I was just going to say, it gets back to, the need or the desire for those projects, the opportunity that you've got with regard to the amount of state aid that you could get. I know there was a discussion last time I was here as to whether or not the city could get more state aid, to pursue that and to evaluate.
We're hoping on that, but hoping.
Well, and then what you're saying, if there's potential for that a commercial business would leave, then that needs to be considered, because that would hurt the residents more anyway. The cost would then shift over on account of that. So, you would want to evaluate it and preempt it and look at what you have to do and have that public conversation about that, because, I think the more transparent all this is, I think that, clearly the city, this is a really big undertaking, but the city's got a lot of opportunities. First, to get all this state aid. Second, these kind of interest rates. So there's, but we don't really have, that's not our expertise about the shift.
Councilor Ducey.
Thank you. So I know that folks are concerned that if their property, if the, I keep on forgetting the language, I'm sorry. If it's a flat rate, level
debt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Level debt, right?
Yeah.
Level debt. So if it's a level debt, flat rate every year, and people's property values begin to increase,
Yep.
does the debt on the bond increase, or is that going to stay the same, and the increase in their property taxes would just be an artifact of the tax rate itself?
Yeah, the debt never changes. Once it's issued, it's fixed. So if people's property values go up, the tax impact would be it would be a lesser dollar amount here, because lesser dollars on more value would produce the same amount of money to pay the debt service payment. So it's the same cost, but at that point, if the assessed value went up, you would think that perhaps there was more wherewithal to pay the same payment, that there was less wherewithal the year before, because now they've got more value in their property. But it's not like they're built, it's not like the cost goes up, it doesn't.
Okay.
If somebody's value went up faster than somebody else's value, that's different. Then the impact would get redistributed differently from year to year.
And then I do want to, just because the way that we record these meetings, this tape is going to be a different tape than the previous meeting. I know that you had said a number of things about how really going for the debt exclusion reflects a lot of positive things for the city, and you rolled off a lot of ways that it could be interpreted as a positive act. Do you mind just rolling through some of those thoughts again so that it's on this tape?
Sure, it's just, to do a debt exclusion shows that the city is interested in protecting the flexibility it's got under the lower levy limit, which I think is limited at this point. It's limited for most municipalities, but I think it's especially limited for Holyoke, although you just freed up a little bit of space with the sewer rate, with the sewer picking up its own costs, that also is something that's a very positive. Enterprise activities are expected to pay their own way. The fact that the city voted the CPA is a very positive thing. And in the same way, a debt exclusion. If the city is willing and shows its willingness to tax itself for what it wants and what it needs, then that's viewed really positively. It's not going to change the rating, but trying to squeeze in something like a $50 or $56 million project inside Prop 2.5, I think that would undermine the rating. It would undermine the reserve, the ability to maintain the reserve position. It would undermine a lot of things, I think, to try to deal with that. So the fact that it just shows a willingness. The rating used to be based on the ability and willingness to pay, and the debt exclusion shows the willingness, and the willingness to pay for what the city wants. It's the same thing as an operating override. It does the same thing. It shows that you're willing to pay to have level of services. Here it shows you're willing to pay to have these projects.
So, and in some ways, so when you're talking about having a positive effect, you're talking about on the folks that would analyze our bond rating?
Not just the people that analyze your bond rating, but also the people who evaluate whether or not they want to invest in the city's bonds, and the people who decide whether or not they want to invest in the city or want to buy property here. Why would anybody want to buy a piece of property if they weren't going to maintain it themselves, and if the city wasn't going to manage and maintain and replace, if it needs to, its infrastructure? So it's got that unquantifiable. If the city wants to, the vision is to have people want to move into the city and invest here, which, I'm sure, then investing and being willing to invest in 2 new schools says, we're willing to invest, we want you to invest. So I think that's the message that it gives. It gives that out to everybody. Communities that are deferring infrastructure and not willing to do anything and aren't getting anywhere with themselves, that hurts them in more ways than, in obvious ways.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Councilor Bacon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in and putting these numbers out before us. But to your earlier point, we do have unique business considerations and concerns in the city. I've gotten feedback from a number that have said my taxes will go up $145,000 to a high of $600,000. And we are a unique city in that we have 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 10 players on the business side of our city that are paying a huge amount of the taxes. So I really appreciate you showing us the level debt expense and the savings over a shorter term bond, which is what we did when we bought our home. But I just really hear you on the willing part, but I'm really focused on the able part. Because the coal plant is still killing us, and we have a struggling mall. We have businesses that have recently invested serious money in the city. However, if you look at our growth in the city, with all the discussions that we've had about how if you just look at the whole numbers rather than the percentages, we're really a good deal. I think in the last 2 budgets, we've seen under $1 million of growth. So, I mean, on the one hand, we're attractive. On the other hand, we have these negatives going against us. And one of the huge problems we have in the city is we don't have infrastructure to build a gas-heated project in the city through our HG&E. That's been in effect since January. They have a moratorium on any big project. So, I mean, we're, from the perspective of, speaking for myself, sitting on the city council, looking at fiscal responsibility, and clearly, if we vote to put this on the ballot, we are indicating to the public that we think this is an affordable thing. I see a totally tight budget. I see that if we have another CSO project that's required, which we know are coming down the pike, we might be squeaking out of one debt just to fit that one in, because like, we've been spending up to the max. Our free cash is like minimal and declining each year. So I hear you on the message that if it goes on the ballot and the citizens vote for it, that it shows a willingness and infrastructure desire to keep the infrastructure of the city up. But we have many infrastructure concerns in the city, some that I think are mandated, where the school option, the only one we've been presented with is 2. We haven't had the option of 1, or we haven't had the option to consider other options. I mean, we're just sort of faced here with an all or nothing thing. But I do appreciate being able to take these numbers and crunch them and then fit it into the context that we're in and see what the impact would be. And I hope we're going to give members of the public an opportunity to react to some of the information if they choose to, which has been put out as well. So I do want to thank you for that, but those are the binds I see us in, or the things that we really have to carefully consider.
I think you said it exactly right. I mean, I think that's what, you're grappling with. So, that this is just to help you
And we appreciate
figure out
that input.
what you think and what, what the city wants to do.
Counselor Sullivan and then Counselor McGiverin.
She must have seniority. She's got seniority in age.
My 2 young colleagues.
So I just wanted to comment that the positives that we're talking about, that we mentioned, most of these positives that I'm hearing are in the eyes of lending institutions, bond raters, and stuff like that. I don't see them as positives in the eyes of any businesses, new businesses coming to Holyoke, people trying to develop new industries in Holyoke. And as far as the residential piece, I think where we're unique and different from the rest of the state is I think what's really, really attracting people to Holyoke is we have the lowest average property values around. You can still buy a Queen Anne Victorian in Holyoke for $309,000. The same house in the eastern end of the state would be over $1 million. The very same piece of property. So to say that that this would be a real positive that would bring even more people to Holyoke, I don't think that's the case in our situation. I think it's only a real positive as far as investors, bond raters, and stuff like this. So, that's one thing I think we need to be clear about with the public, all right? We've really got to approach this somehow in a way that's not going to have such a detrimental effect, not only on the existing business community, but our ability to bring new industry in, which is what we really need to do to start expanding our tax base and really make the property values go up. And, I'm very, very, very much in favor. I disagree. I think we really have over the course of the last 2 years, the building committee and the school committee has done a wonderful job. The superintendent, I'm not going to call him a receiver anymore. I'm glad he's here. He's the superintendent. And they've done a great job and have convinced me that we need the new schools, all right? And that we've got to find a way to do this. And I'm hoping Councilor McGiverin, he's much more eloquent than I am, will take over at this point, that we've got to also bring all the pressure we can bear on this state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that has stuck us in this situation of what I've heard other people refer to as unconstitutionally underfunded and deeply inequitable funding process.
Music to our ears.
So
I'm glad it's a fundraiser upstairs. I think what Councilor Sullivan is alluding to is right into what I wanted to talk about Cinder real quick, and I know you have to get on the road. We learned maybe a year ago, Margaret Woods, and through meeting with everybody, that the 80% cap isn't what we thought it was. I'm sorry, not the 80% cap, the 80% reimbursement is not what we thought it was. The MSBA has been great to us. They're allowing us to go forward, probably one of the first projects that's actually 2 projects with good reason. As Councilor Sullivan said, the building committee, led by Dr. Zreich, and the school committee has put together with their resources a plan that makes sense. A plan that would also see savings within the school budget itself in terms of consolidating elementary schools. We get all that. The MSBA gets that. And I understand why they have a construction cap, formula for a construction cap. Otherwise, communities would just be saying, let's spend their money. So that makes sense. It's the 5 incentives that we as a gateway community, as pointed out, the poorest community in the Commonwealth cannot take advantage of one of those incentives to get above where we're at, which is probably 58, 59% if we're lucky. We can't look at the MSBA to change that. Their hands are tied. But we're looking, and Councilor McGee filed the order, I co-sponsored with them, and the City Council voted on it unanimously. We're asking the legislature to change that and to look at us differently right now and to get us closer to that 80%. Because I'm guessing if we change that $50 million number down to something below $40 million, this opens up a whole new ballgame for the taxpayers, and something that I think, regardless of commercial or residential, you can sink your teeth into it, especially if we found some other monies to even reduce that borrowing dollar amount more. Have you ever seen anything attempted by a community like that, like us? Or do you think we have any idea yet that we could be successful in getting the legislature to change something in time for us to go forward?
It's not really my.
I know, but I just thought while you're here, we put you on the spot.
I mean, I think that you deserve to get more than 56%. I think that's I think that's not fair. That doesn't seem fair to me, that 56%. A lot of the municipalities that have more capacity are getting very little or none. I mean, we've seen municipalities, but they're basically some of the wealthier communities that are told you're never going to get to the top of the list because you're not going to move to the top of the list. If you want to go forward, we're not giving you anything. And they decide we want to take advantage of these rates, we're going to go forward. But if it were me, I'd give Holyoke more.
Thank you.
That's not a good answer, but I don't really have an answer for that. You'd have to almost get, I think that it's a compelling argument you make, and I think you should just not give up on that. I'd be calling them every day. I'd be calling the MSBA people every day. What are they, I'd be working them as much as I could with your legislators, and I think you got a compelling argument with the mayor. Go in there.
I think it's the legislature's, first. The MSBA needs the legislature to recognize there's something amiss with the formula itself, and to take, not the blame, but to take the initiative to correct it. Because when an affluent community gets above the construction cap, and at least 3 of those 5 incentives, I can tell you we'd qualify for hands down. And it just makes no sense. We're looking at a battle with the Chapter 70 formula again, which we haven't seen in probably a decade or 2. And this is a community that didn't create poverty, we're a community that services poverty, and we do a pretty good job at it, but it comes with a price tag that I don't think bedroom communities can ignore, that they have responsibilities towards low-income issues and to low-income services that are needed, because Holyoke didn't create it, we service it. But that's a story for another day. I just like to get that editorial in whenever I can.
No, it's good to hear that, it's good to know that that's what's going on with the project, that the city is going after more state aid, and I hope that the city is successful with that. And, you might want to, you got the same option, to delay the project until you can really fully explore that possibility. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we are going to let you leave the chamber, unless you want to go up there and dance.
Have a party.
They were, and told me to invite anyone that wanted to go and dance. Obviously, they're having a party, so. Thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate it. And if you could send the debts with 56 million and do that same thing, that scale that you did. If you email it to me, I'll make sure all the counselors get it.
Okay, good.
Thank you very
56
much.
million.
Thank you.
And have a safe drive back. Did we get the chauffeur for you, by the way? Not today?
Not today.
Not in the budget.
No, it's not in the budget. That's okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to go over a couple other things, because I've been trying to do a lot of communications to a lot of different people, and just so you know, there's a few other things that I found out in the last 3 weeks. One from the state election division, and it's, we only have two, if we were to put a question on the ballot, we do have two choices. It could be November or a special election. People that asked me, could you do it during a preliminary election, and it is not allowed. So that as a second or a third option is not allowed. So it's either a special election or a November election from the Secretary of State's Election Division office. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Council Murphy,
Yes.
do you mind reading that letter from Crystal again? Because I have an email from, it was from Brenna with the attachment with the language for the debt exclusion ballot question, and that was received by the City Council at the April 11th meeting. So I don't know what the communication that you're reading refers to exactly. But we do have the language.
Not according to what I received today from Crystal.
We have accepted it.
I'm only telling you what I've got here from her, telling me that what they're going to do, it's going to be changed.
Can you read it again?
Certainly. We have a specific language for our ballot question vote for city council that needs to be done rather than what is on the agenda for tonight. The council will be voting, as I mentioned in my letter to the council, on the bond contingent on council then voting to place it on the ballot. Ideally, you can discuss tonight, but there will be a separate, accurate order coming before the council soon.
For the bond, though, I think that, and that speaks to the point that Cinder was talking about earlier, we actually go to debt exclusion when we authorize the vote, and that's a specific language to say that when we vote with a ballot, affirmative ballot vote, then we are going to be bonding. So I think that's what yeah, the authorization upon the vote, and that language has to be filled out. But we have the language for the ballot question.
Not according to what I have from Crystal. And, okay.
Can we open up?
Yes.
Because we have any members of the public who haven't spoken.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion has been made.
I wasn't on the record. Motion is to open up to public comment, because I know there's new members here in the public who would like to speak.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Can we make definitely a 2-minute limit?
So, and we do apologize. There obviously was an appointment for a festival upstairs, or I'm not sure, some type of fundraiser. We didn't get notice, so just a scheduling conflict, but we can get through it.
So if you would like to comment, we're going to do it, and I'm going to really be strict doing a 2-minute, 2 hours, not going to work, 2-minute time limit. I'm taking the watch off to see, and again, if you can come up give us your name, your address, and then I'll start the clock. So whoever would like to come up, if you have any comments that you would like to make, this is your chance.
Hi, my name's Bill Rogowski. I live at 71 Apricot Hill Lane, West Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm here representing the Holyoke Mall, also representing taxpayers and the commercial sector. I'll try and be as brief as possible. I think everybody understands that the shopping center industry is under a lot of stress right now, a lot of external pressure. I don't think the communities of Lanesboro, Enfield, and Springfield 12 years ago envisioned that they would have dead properties in their city. If you look at the Enfield Mall, it sold in 2008 for $82 million. It went to auction this year and sold for 11.6. We are the largest taxpayer in the city to the tune of $8 million. I would tell you that any tax increase at this point in our industry is a hardship. A $600,000 tax increase is an extreme hardship. Our business model has changed drastically. We're not writing the same deals that we wrote 15 years ago, back in the days when we had a Sears box filled. So for us to repurpose a Sears box, it's an astronomical cost, and that's out of our pocket. We've got to go to the street to finance that ourselves, much like the city needs to finance these projects here. So I would ask, this can't be rushed to judgment. You can't be, I would ask that, you tap the brakes on this, not get it to a ballot question immediately, because, there are some financial issues here that are serious. We can't, again, it's, for us, there's a lot of financial pressure. And to absorb that. On top of the CPA, if you add the CPA in, we're up to $750,000 a year, which is, that's almost a 10% increase. That's a pretty big nut for us to handle. So again, I would like to say, thank you for vetting this out. We appreciate the fiscal responsibility, but for us, again, I can't say extreme hardship enough. It's huge for us. And I think we've been a pretty darn good partner to the city. I know I don't come into the city hall often. In 17 years, I'm not here asking for things. I'm not at, I'm not in the mayor's office. I'm not in front of the city council. Our checks show up right on time every quarter. We're just asking. I think we've been a good partner. I think we're asking for a little reciprocal partnership on the way back. And I know the state reimbursement's an issue. There's an option of renovate and reuse, but I think as Mike was saying, if the tax rate goes to almost $42.60 a thousand, we might as well put a billboard up on I-91 and say, you're not welcome here, but the communities of West Springfield, Chicopee, and Springfield are open for business, and they're ready to have the opportunity. This is a huge, and it's a huge decision, but it's a huge risk. There's a lot at stake. You talk about losing the coal plant. I know I went over the limit, so I'm gonna stop right here, but I just wanted.
The first time I gave you 30 extra seconds.
And I apologize for that, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
And we appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other constituents want to comment? If you do, step up and give us your name, address.
I'm William Radner, and I'm president of American Rug in Holyoke. And we've been here in the city 114 years, probably one of the oldest businesses here and the oldest retailer. And business is getting pretty bad here. It's tougher. I did more business a few years ago than now. Why? Because a lot of people are saying they don't want to come into Holyoke. And they're telling me, well, gee, I came to see you, but my husband didn't even want me to come into the town. And that's a terrible thing to hear. Now, I think the city has to do something for infrastructure, develop High Street, get people to come in here. Then you'll have additional taxes that will pay for some of these things. But right now, the roads are shot. I just ruined a tire in the city 2 weeks ago on St. Jerome Avenue. There were like 8 potholes in a row. I mean, there's things that need repair here. Can the city schools be repaired? I don't know, but if a few competent contractors came in who knew what they were doing, I bet you could do it for a fifth the price you got a quote on by renovating. You can fix anything with money, and if nobody comes in to evaluate it, you're not gonna know what you can do. I grew up and I went to the Kirtland School on Sargent Street. I knew what the conditions were there at that time. I don't think it was a lot better then than what the schools are right now that you're talking about. We all got an education. We had 5 times the amount of students back then that you have now. I just don't see why this kind of an expenditure has to be made. It is a severe burden to the taxpayers. If the residences are paying a fair share of it, they should be known, it should be known on the ballot that they're gonna have to pay a certain amount of money, not just say, are you for it? Let them know they're gonna have to pay, and then they'll evaluate.
Legally, we are not allowed to do
I
that.
understand. So you people have to make the right decision before it goes on the ballot, because you can't have 10 kids a question that they want gifts, they want this, but the parents are the ones that know if they have the money to pay for it. So,
Okay, thank
that's
you
my
very much.
opinion.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Hannah Kennedy, 85 Eastern Promenade. As a resident here and as a parent, I think it's vitally important that we put this out to the community to vote. I kind of resent the implication that we're greedy children, is what I took from that. Well, but I don't see myself as a child. I see myself as someone who will be paying for it. And I think that part of the infrastructure is schools. And if we don't have schools, we're not going to get new families into this community. I mean, I have a kindergartner, that's my oldest. I have 3 boys. You know, I plan to put them through the schools in Holyoke, but if those schools aren't going to be there, then we're going to go elsewhere. And I'm not alone. I think that that is part of the infrastructure that's going to help us revitalize this community. You can't revitalize it on businesses that no one's coming to. You have to have people in town that can spend the money. You have to have people have a reason to be in town. You have to have people have a reason to want to come here. And, you know, if people aren't coming to town because it's not safe, one of the big things that we can do to help make the community safer, feel safer, and just be safer overall is going to be to offer education, to get people off the street, to, you know, help brighten the community. These buildings are going to be a real positive source, both for the community as far as resources, but also visually for the community. It's going to make it seem like we care, and it's going to help revitalize the community and bring more shoppers into the community as a whole.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Good evening, Helene Florio, 31 Wellesley Road, here in Holyoke, and I am also president of Holyoke Taxpayers. I think you have one question that you really have to answer, and that is, can the city afford the proposed project? I learned this week that some of the information that we've been hearing is pretty much just to one side, and that there are other sides to it I think that the public needs to hear. For example, there's been a big push that we have to get all this information on a ballot this spring and to the MSBA by the end of June. Well, the MSBA also meets in August, so we would not have to have the cost of a separate election, over $50,000 in the spring. And if this was down to the MSBA at the end of August, the 120-day count that you have could take us to the timing of the election that is scheduled in November, and it would give the community an opportunity to have a longer time span to get information out. That's just one small part of it. I also feel that I want to tell you today, I met this week with Gary Rome, and he is one of the businesses, he was unable to be here tonight, but he's one of the businesses that has had a really substantial commitment and increase within the community. And he said his amount on the tax bill would mean, and he worked it all out, he would have to charge $79 for an oil change. And he said, that puts me out of business. The reason people like the Gary Rome dealership as much as they do is that the prices that he has, he keeps with an extremely low margin, far lower margin than any of the other Hyundai dealerships around the area. And he said, this would be the straw that would break the camel's back. I have another dealership in Enfield, and I would go there in a heartbeat. And I also think of the 70 people that he has employed in the mechanics and the people that are working in his place on a daily basis. This is the kind of effect that this decision, at the cost that they are now on the businesses, and how it can affect us here in Holyoke. And I find that very sad. And there's fewer and fewer businesses. I'm not sure which one Councilor Sullivan was talking about today. And I was going to mention, we're very fortunate to have Bill Rogowski here tonight. I had the figures on his. You stop and think about losing $8 million if the mall were to close, and that's before the increase. It would be catastrophic. So we really need to take a look at other options too. No one is against education or against the schools, but I think we have to see if there's other options that are available that could be presented. I don't want to take any more time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some updates from the committee. I don't know if you want them now or you want them.
Put your name in, though, too.
Oh, Devin Sheehan, 131 Norwood Terrace, but I have some committee updates to provide. I don't know if you'd want them now or after public comment that may help guide you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay. So after just some things that have transpired probably since the end of last week, after speaking with the mayor, the receiver, the OPM, and others, we are requesting from the MSBA to go to the August meeting. So there is no June meeting deadline, and we have that 120-day window from the August meeting, which would facilitate and allow for a November, 5th or whatever election, for that to both help with the city we've heard some of the concerns. Now, it's not a guarantee that the MSBA will say, yes, that's okay, but that request was put out there to them. Also in the...
Can I just stop you just for 1 second? Because I did speak with somebody from the MSBA this, I think either Monday or Friday, one of those. And they also indicated even if we did go in June, they would have no problem with doing a November ballot, even though the 120 days, I said, it's 13 days, and they said, you won't have a problem if you do that. So just
Sure. The technical challenges with that, though, if we had gone in June and decided to ask for an extension by 13 days or whatever to November, is that the pricing that we would be entering to the MSBA would be pricing that was based on a vote that was happening earlier. So having to account for escalations or any other price differences, it wouldn't really be a true cost number that we could submit to the MSBA. So by being able to push it to an August meeting to have that 120-day window without having to ask for the other extension, it actually allows that we can submit more accurate costs. I mean, they give 120 days because there's an assumption that the costs that you quote out and the reports you develop are good within that period. So that was why we put that request in and didn't just ask, can we do this in November and can we get some extra time? But it was so we have time to make sure that everything we submit is the most current, so it's not 7 months old by the time it goes to a ballot or if it goes to the ballot. So that's why we did that. with incentive points, I think what's really interesting after speaking with our project manager and really pushing what if we could qualify for incentive points, what would that exact number be that Holyoke would actually be eligible for with the project and with the different incentives? I think there's 16 different areas that the legislature originally allowed for them, and they can add or remove them as they need to. But we would actually qualify for about 4.38% per project on the incentive points if we could exceed that 80%. And I think Councilor McGiverin brought up before that the 80% is something set by the legislature. Right in the law, when they developed the reimbursement system, it says that no community can exceed an 80% reimbursement. So it is, as was mentioned, a legislative action that would be needed if we were able to get that 4.38%. And that's something that I know that Councilor McGee and yourself and Councilor Sullivan, and I'm not sure if I missed, and LeBron Martinez were at a meeting last week at PAC where there were some members of the House Education Committee there, House and Senate Education Committee. And we had a great discussion about some of the special needs of Holyoke because we are in receivership, we have financial issues. I mean, all the things that are different about Holyoke than any other of the 351 communities here in the Commonwealth. So we're working on some possibilities that may provide some relief. And I know the President mentioned that we had talked about that. So, I mean, there's some things. So I think that just to kind of dispel that, there is no, at this point, there is no rush to the committee to have an election tomorrow or a special election, that a November election is something so long as, I mean, we asked MSBA, it's waiting, they have to, I mean, there's red tape, it's government, I mean, nothing's pretty when doing that, but we have to get their permission to say, yes, we can go in August, yes, we can do this, and the steps with that. But just so everyone's fully aware that we are, I mean, there's right now that we are good with that option, and I think, speaking with the mayor, I mean, there's no questions about that.
Okay, could I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Since obviously I ended up leaving that meeting to go to another meeting.
Yeah.
So with the senator, and I can't think of his name, and representative, I know when we were talking, I didn't get a vibe like they were thinking like there was anything they could really do. At the end of the meeting, were they any more receptive to helping Representative Vega and Senator Humberson to file something to help us out?
Sure. So I will tell you, my life has been consumed probably since Thursday of figuring out some sort of piece of legislation that we can get to them. And the House is having budget debates right now. They could be done at this point. But so there was no time to file something onto the House budget. Senator Humberson and Senator Lewis, who's the chair of the Education Committee, have committed to Representative Vega that they will jointly file a piece of legislation that they'll file a budget amendment that because Holyoke is in receivership, and the reason for Holyoke, but the premise being that in the Level 5 receivership law, that it specifically states that certain departments in the government, certain secretaries of the government, where appropriate, and where money is appropriated, that they can give additional assistance. So with that, they are willing to file legislation or a budget amendment to allow for Holyoke to possibly take advantage of the incentive points that they would have been eligible for. It's being drafted now. I don't have any formal language that I can share with you or what needs to be done around that just as a benefit to the city, but it's something that's being worked on by them. They're aware of it. There's actually, there was some very specific things that were, that they thought that Holyoke would need for that. And
Okay.
Representative Vega and I have talked next steps just in case, but that is being worked on. So, and it is on the radar. Really, there's been a lot of communication regarding that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Kevin Jourdain, 18 Raymond Avenue. I want to thank Devin for that. Each time we come to these meetings, it's more evidence of why we need to continue to work, because we continue to learn more, we continue to get more information, and hopefully we'll get to a point where, before it was, we never could possibly have a November ballot. Now tonight we learned we can have a November ballot if that was good. So we're getting there. We're going to take this hopefully a little bit further. First thing I'd like to talk about is the role of the city council in this. This is not a vote of the city council in some sort of Pontius Pilate, wash my hands of it. Just vote to put this on the ballot. The reason the city council has the sole authority to put this question to the ballot is because you, the body, deem that this is financially prudent for the taxpayers, that if they were to adopt this, that this is the mechanism that is best for the city. So be clear, a vote of the city council to put this on the ballot is an endorsement of the question. Hopefully at some point we'll see what that question ultimately is. I want to just point out a couple different things. Currently, the City of Holyoke has the 48th highest residential tax rate in Massachusetts. If this proposed ballot question of $1.31 were to go through, Holyoke would then have the 19th highest in the entire Commonwealth, despite the fact that we have the lowest per capita income in Massachusetts. Councilor Sullivan correctly points out that Holyoke currently has the 3rd highest commercial tax rate in Massachusetts. If this were to go through at $2.72, it would absolutely blow the doors and push us to the highest commercial tax rate, even over cash-strapped North Adams by over $1. These are numbers that are just preposterous. These are absurd. I would like to point out that, one, I don't think we can afford, by taxing the public, our way into affording these 2 new schools. I think that we're either going to have to use a combination of government reform and some of the dollars that are saved that Dr. Reich appropriately pointed out, such as $500,000 that would be saved in bus funding money that doesn't go towards net school spending. You would have to use a combination of those dollars and not go on a tax increase in order to do those things like the pension obligation bond. I would point out, if those could not work, we need to come back to this question of the other options. With this more time, you need to refocus on the one school option. You also need to look again at the renovation and reuse. I wanted to cite another example. Is in 2005, the Holyoke Charter School renovated the Mammoth Mart, a building that was a non-school building, a warehouse, if you will, type building, okay? And they renovated that with acquisition and renovation for 700 students, cost $20 million. $20 million. And we're talking about 2 schools at a sum of $132 million. I want to make a couple points. What if it doesn't come in at $132 million? A debt exclusion vote is an authorization. It is unlimited in scope. 2 last points. When Bill Rogowski, in the 25 years that I was down here at City Council, he never asked me once for anything. When this man says this is an extreme hardship to the Holyoke Mall, do we want to be known as the City Council that could potentially put the Holyoke Mall out of business? This is a person that needs to be listened to. The last other point that I wanted to mention is nowhere in the proposal to build the 2 new schools is any of the cost to cover Lawrence School at all. They have no answer for the Lawrence School. We're going to now maintain that as a building. It was sort of left out there as, well, we'll probably demo it and make it into a park and maybe some parking lot. No. Now I was corrected to say, oh no, we absolutely will keep Lawrence School, and now we have to maintain it. Now we have to make improvements to it, just as if there were a renovation, or it will become the next Lynch. And we know how that story turned out. And I also want, and it is not lost on me as someone who has closely observed government for a long time, that this very school leadership in 2008 said, no middle school model. We must have K-8. We must close Lynch. Okay, now everything changed. We had middle school model for 30 years, and here we are, 132 million, or all this plenty of terrible things will happen. I have news for you. 700 parents send their kids to the charter school. A clean, a lovely, but not an elaborate Taj Mahal as proposed here. Children every day go to Blessed Sacrament School. They go to Mater Della Rosa School. Very Spartan one-hall buildings. And somehow they manage to not pick up a life of crime, and that they do get a great education. Children do not need Taj Mahals. It's that lack of focus. That's why we're in receivership in the first place.
Next.
Truth hurts.
Just put it down, Mary.
Okay, I'm short, I know. My name is Mary Burks, and you didn't have to laugh at my short joke. And I live at 63 Taylor Street. A couple of comments I'd like to make, and I'd like to take a deep breath because I don't want to comment in a way that's inappropriate. First of all, the tax rate, if it's 48th highest in the state, has been set by this city council for many years, some of which you were president. The issue of building 2 new schools and the costs associated therewith and the need to fund them has been in front of this city council for at least 3 or 4 years, at least one of which you were on the council. If I quote from an article in Mass Live, and I can't say that they quoted you accurately, but at the time you said, this is big, big bucks, but it's something we have to do. This is not something that is new coming before this city council. The need to move from a middle school model to a K-8 model came about because the city was unable to move the needle at middle schools and looked at another option. At this point in time, that option does not seem to be yielding the results they hoped it would yield, and are moving, back towards a middle school model. I would hope that educators in this community and in this state continue to move forward and improve, learn lessons the way business does about continuous improvement, and not stay stuck someplace that isn't yielding the results they want. The same is true for the design of schools. For a long time, architects really didn't have much to go on, and we wound up with something like Peck. Of late, there is much more research that has been done that talks about the kinds of structures that should be included in school design to meet the needs of the future that we can't even sit here and predict. When I was going through school, I could predict what the future would look like for me. I cannot predict that for the students that are in our schools now. You can say all you want about what the charter schools are achieving. I mean, people have to apply. 2, they don't have to keep students that they don't want to keep. They can send them back to the public schools. 3, particularly for the charter school in Holyoke, it's a profit-making venture. It makes money off the students we send to them. It makes a profit. We need to invest in the students we have in this city so that they can someday contribute to the profit of this city. I think I'm beyond offended at a remark that, the public schools in this city are producing people who live a life of crime. I have plenty of...
Okay.
Then I misunderstood.
Okay.
The chair.
You have the floor, Mary.
Can I? That's what I heard, and so I apologize if that's not what was said, because that's what I heard. And I just feel that we owe our students the best we can give them, and sometimes it requires some sacrifice. And I think if we're not going to sacrifice for our children, then who are we going to sacrifice for?
Okay, thank you. And if I can just, and I'm going to make an editorial comment here as chair. So again, there's a lot of emotion, and it's not easy not to have emotion, but in reality, I'm hoping we just continue to deal with the pros and cons of the issue, the economic situation, the education situation, because ultimately, when it's all said and done, whatever happens, we have got to be a community if we are going to be successful. So again, and I've been through things, not on this kind of an issue, but other kind of things. We need to figure out a way to deal the pros and cons, to try to find what's the right answer, both educationally for the kids, also economically for the community. And it's not an easy answer. This is a very tough question. And believe me, I've looked at, as I told Dr. Wright today, I've tried to find a perfect answer and I haven't found it yet. But again, just try to deal with the facts, deal with those presentations, and let's try to keep as much of the emotion as calm as possible. So thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, and also address to the chair. Go ahead.
Yes, Dave Yost, 20 Sydney Avenue. Now I'm up to 5 grandchildren, 1 in the system already and 4 going in. And I want to say I particularly appreciate and encouraged by Councilor McGiverin's and Devin Sheehan's comments. Kind of the way I see this, we're kind of answering an injustice with an injustice, because as far as our operating funds for the schools, we had the education reform back in 1993, which was supposed to make a equitable funding, but the latest, what I'm reading on it, we're still way below the welfare communities on our operating funding. And speaking of the property tax rates, I was looking today, if you look at our property tax rate as the average, I'm talking more about the average taxpayer instead of the higher, the high-end people. If we look at it as a percentage of per capita income, if I'm trying to say this right, we're the 8th highest in the Commonwealth. So, in other words, if we have a tax increase, the average person in Holyoke is paying a higher percentage of his or her income for that tax increase. So based on that, I'd just like to see this funding come from more sources outside of the city instead of already putting more pressure on our already hard-pressed taxpayers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much for your comments. So, I'm a kind man.
I'm sorry, but thank you. The one thing that I think the public really needs to know, and I'm sure that as counselors you are all aware, if one of the businesses were to go out of business after this vote was taken and the debt exclusion override had been started and had been bonded, for example, if the mall were to close and we were to lose the $8 million in taxes that we had, and then the $608,000 that would be their percentage on the new things, that loss is something that the residents and the other businesses would have to equally share. That loss does not go away for the 30 years or however the length of the bonding is. And I think people should keep that in mind also when you're making the decision. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have Dr. Wright come in if that's okay. Did you have a question?
I'm not seeing anything, so I'd like to offer a motion to table while we can review the financial information, and we're going to take in...
I'm going to just hold off. I'm going to have Dr. Wright come in.
Oh, sure.
Dr. Wright, can you come on in?
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. And I'm going
I didn't see him
to...
raise his hand. I was going to give him...
No, I'm going to actually come in.
Okay, sure.
I'll let you sit down because you told me you weren't feeling well.
Thank you.
So I take care of you. So let me start off. and offer a few constructive comments in terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to work things through here. Dr. Reich and I have been talking about trying to find ways for the schools to contribute more towards whatever we're doing, and today we pretty much, if you want Anthony to come on in, Anthony, come on in.
Anthony to join me up here.
No 3-pointers here, Anthony. Anthony used to be a very good basketball player.
Please do
Right,
not
Ronnie?
do not feed the ego.
I said he used to be.
All right, please. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could we invite in Margaret Wood also, because I've got a couple of pointed questions. We might as well have them all here at the
Okay,
same time.
Margaret, come on in, if you would. So, Dr. Zark and I were talking, I know he's spoken with Mr. Soto as well, and they've also, I believe, have talked, because I have also requested the State Commissioner of Education to let us consider using some of the school money to help us pay for the bond. And so I know part of that, there was parts that were illegal, but parts that potentially could be available. And the figure at this point is approximately $1 million that could be paid on a yearly basis to offset some of the bond. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not through the Chapter 70 dollars. I mean, you can't use net school spending dollars towards capital projects. But we, in the effort to be creative and innovative, we do think there's ways, obviously with the idea that we'd have $4 to $5 million of savings, which is the number we have, shared consistently, that we could provide relief through our agreements with the city. And we believe there are strategies that can achieve, an approximate $1 million worth of relief on an annual basis, provided that we're able to, provided the buildings are built, right, and it allows us to reorganize the school district and become a more efficient school system down the road, which is what we've said from the start. So that's we feel comfortable in that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Anthony, but those are the discussions we've had since our last meeting, and we have discussed that with the Department of Education. We do feel like, as a school system, we want to do our part and contribute what we think we can. Obviously, we'd like to use some of the resources to improve the product, the services in the schools as well. I mean, that was part of the. It's not just about getting new buildings. It's about being a much more efficient district that provides better experiences for kids.
Anthony, you want to add anything to that?
No, the only thing I would add is that, some of the strategies that if we were to save the $4 million, we've talked through with the state, some strategies that we would be able to relieve without compromising the city's ability to meet net school spending.
That's right. Yeah.
And without increasing class sizes or doing anything drastic to cut our budget. So we would be able to, as Dr. Reich said, provide, run a more efficient system, and assuming we're realizing $4 million in savings a year, we're confident with going out and saying that we can, discuss strategies to ensure that some of those savings provide some relief to the taxpayers.
Okay, and just also so you know, we did talk about the need if we can do that and we get to that point, the need to be able to put a contractual agreement so that we're not going, as Dr. Drake said to me, one or two of us might not be around when this happens, and that's very well the case. I know one of us won't be, but if we need to work on that, we would need to have legal ramifications so that we're all on board. This is going to take place. The schools are going to provide $1 million of the $3.5 or $3.4 million a year. So it's cutting down on the amount of money that the taxpayers would be paying directly for the bond. So I will say Dr. Reich and I have been we talk far more than I would have. My wife thinks he's my best friend now. I tell her I don't have any
Not gonna
friends.
be around,
so
you're not going
that
to be
settles
around that long, though, so I don't know how.
So just so you know, we are trying to work things, and we are trying to find what can we do to make the situation the best that we can make it. And again, it's no easy answers to it, but I just want to let you know that we've been working on it, and he did bring that up to me today prior to coming to the meeting. So, and we will continue to work to try to find ways to bring costs down, to bring educational quality up, to make the economic situation in the city better as much as we can. So, any other questions, comments? Oh, Councilor Sullivan?
Yeah, so, as far as a ballot question, so we can't put a dollar amount out, this is a question through the chair, right?
We cannot.
So we cannot put a dollar amount out. That, I guess we're saddled with that, which seems to me grossly unfair. But as far as the wording or the public information, what we're looking at here, I think we've got a timing problem, all right? If we've got state legislatures, and I've sat with the building committee and everybody, and they've done a wonderful job, but we've got a timing issue here. If we plow ahead and go ahead with this, we got this escalation problem. And we're talking, 3% and, 3 million, 4 million, possibly 5 million, the longer we put this off. But having met with this Senator Lewis and the rest, if we got to 80% funding by delaying this, we could cut the price in half to the taxpayers. So that's a problem I have with rushing to ballot with this, is this timing issue. Now, I don't know how we get this onto a ballot question, and this is what we need to think about a little, I believe. But Margaret, if we were expressing to the MSBA that we were willing to go ahead, expressing to them, with going for 27 million in funding, something that would reflect an 80% savings, and put our cards on the table. Here it is. What kind of would that bring enough additional pressure on the legislature to act? I understand the MSBA changing their formula will take way too long. But as we heard earlier, these earmarks, special fundings, waivers of these other terms and packages they have, whatever, the additional savings that can be brought by the school board and stuff like that, is this enough to keep the project going forward?
So I think what the MSBA would say, and it's awkward to put myself in their position, but I think I can channel, I think we've worked with them long enough. I think what they would say is, if you only want to spend $27 million, you should go back and propose a project that is only $27 million. I don't think, this isn't something, it's not a card game that you can play with them. You can't say, well, we only have this much. Will you make up the difference? I just don't think that will work. That's not the way the system works, because then if they did that with one district, they would be doing that card game with every district. So they have a set of rules. They are largely equitable, and they apply them very, very precisely across all projects.
What pressures can they bring on these Senate and House committees?
I think you probably should ask your representatives that. Because I'm not a politician. I appreciate all of you standing in these roles here and devoting time. But I think that this is a unique situation, and I think Devin and the superintendent have really accurately summarized it for the chairs of the Ed Committee, which is what is unique about Holyoke, where there is some potential leverage, is this issue of you being in receivership in the state law that appears to suggest that that makes you eligible for extra help, essentially. So I think that's a sort of good sort of door to open, and I'm glad that's happened. But I also have to comment that I think that the escalation thing is a big concern of mine, and I want to counter what was said earlier about any suggestion that we had said there was only one date around which this could go to the MSBA. The issue is that since a year and a half ago, we had proposed a schedule, which was the schedule, again, which we have to establish with the MSBA, and we have to tell them months and months ahead of time when our submittals are going to be made. The submittals are based on certain assumptions which were built into this about when there was going to be a vote, when the design would start, when the construction would start. So now is absolutely the case that you can go to a later board meeting. What you've done essentially in doing that is you've moved the start date and you've acquired escalation. So the escalation on this project is 3% a year on $106 million worth of construction. It's around $270,000 a month. It's around $12,000, $10,000 a day. So what we're really saying here, and I want to make sure people understand this, is yes, we do think the right thing to do is go to the August board meeting, which is why I made that request on behalf of the city. But if that means that you are now not going to vote, not going to have your ballot date until November, you've acquired about 3 months of escalation plus some other costs. You've probably acquired $1 million in project costs to move it till November. And this is the issue with the legislation. I mean, you're right, Councilor Sullivan. The legislative process doesn't move fast enough to keep up with escalation, and this is the dilemma that anyone who kind of works on buildings, develops buildings, has. Which, and Cinder kind of got into it around the costs of borrowing. The time is not in your favor here, either on the borrowing side or on the commitment side. So what we will need to do, if we're going to go to a later board meeting, as Devin mentioned, is we will need to revise the budgets and the schedules to reflect that we would not be able to start design until after the November vote, presuming that it is in the affirmative, and that would mean that it would be bid later, and it would also mean that we might not be able to deliver both buildings for the fall of 2022. That's not, I'm not making that statement as a statement of, and therefore you shouldn't do it. That is just a statement of facts about how the process works.
Okay, so let me rephrase it a little bit. What's at risk for us is if we have this happen in November and let's say it passes, and then right then we're locked in. Am I correct?
When the board takes their vote, you are locked in.
And if the legislature came afterwards and agreed to add earmarks, those wouldn't be available to us. They added appropriate other funding, changes in the formula, we'd be locked in at the old rate.
Well, again, I'm not a politician, but I think unless it was money that was sort of committed to go to the project, as opposed to changing the funding formula itself, which gets, we would make a submittal in July. In that submittal would be the proposed cost of the project. Once the MSBA has accepted it, which, just to be clear, they have done with the submittal we made in February. It's been accepted, and they were ready to go in April, and we asked them to delay. So now we've asked them to delay again. Now we would resubmit. We would change the schedule and the budget, and that would be it. At the point we make the submittal, we're not negotiating anymore about what the cost of the project is. They know the cost. They know the reimbursement from their perspective. So that would be, I think, if you didn't have a change in the law in place by July 11th, I don't see how it would impact this particular decision with the MSBA.
Right, but that's the law, that's as far as the funding formula. But as far as getting our chance for other earmarks, other grants, whatever, whatever this Senator Lewis and the House Rep feel they might be able to piece together here, would it cut us out from any of those by?
I don't know, because typically when there is grant funding that comes into a project from other sources, the MSBA reduces its contribution by an equivalent amount.
So it almost makes it a disincentive to try to get additional funding, which...
Well, I mean, I want to be clear, you know, because I've said this, you know, I think I said this back last October when I first came here. I think that this incentive points issue is an inequity, and usually communities realize that because we work in those communities, they realize it, and it just, legislation doesn't move as fast as the process does, and nothing moves as fast as escalation. So I think it's a really important discussion you've opened up, but I do think that what's really against you here is the cost of escalation in the project, and whatever you decide to do has to be weighed against that.
But
and the ability to deliver the buildings, you know, in time for a sort of for them to really fully do on day one what they're intended to do, which is to, you know, change the experience of kids and students in the city across 6, 7, and 8.
But the escalation cost, we're talking $3 million a year, but by delaying the project 1 year, not opening until the fall of 2023, it allows us the opportunity to move from possibly 60% funding to 80% funding if they're successful in going after these additional funds, earmarks, and changes. Am I?
Well, I wasn't in the meeting. I would be surprised if it could move 20%, but that's maybe someone who was at the meeting can tell me whether. I'll be honest and say that I think that the folks, from what I understood of the meeting, the folks who were the chairs of the committee were not aware of this issue, and they're kind of unpacking a complicated box.
That's for certain.
Yeah.
That's for certain. One of the things also that was mentioned, I feel it was a very unfair comparison, and I want to bring it out in public now, is what goes on with a charter school. When you take an empty warehouse and spend $20 million, an empty warehouse is in effect a blank slate. And to have any thought that you could do the same with an existing structure with hundreds of dividing walls and different infrastructure in place, and to do the same thing as you could do with an empty warehouse or blank slate is not a fair analysis. And I once again want to let the public know what a very outstanding job I think the building committee has done over the last year in researching and putting together a package that I think is what the children, the future citizens of Holyoke deserve, and what this city really needs more so than I think a lot of surrounding communities or others around us.
Can I comment on one other thing I heard tonight that I want to set the record straight against about? You know, I think everybody hears stories about construction projects kind of blowing up, and kind of it was X and now it's X plus 30%. There's actually, as part of this process, there are healthy contingencies built into this. I mean, that is my job, is to make sure that the amount of money that is proposed as a project cost protects the city. So I was just doing the math a little earlier. There's $5.5 million of escalation contingency in the budget right now, which is based on this 3%. There is $3.2 million of construction contingency, so that's for the things that happen on construction projects that you don't predict. And there is a 2.1 owner's contingency, which is additional money that the city can use for things that may come up, or choices about additional spending they may make. So that's
What was the middle number?
5.5 for escalation, 3.2 for construction, and 2.1 for owner's contingency. So that is a total of almost $11 million, which is a buffer in different buckets, which is built into this project. And it's really important because if the project cost, the issue with the funding agreement is that when you execute the funding agreement with the MSBA, if the project cost goes up, the MSBA's agreement says, not our problem, right? So that's why this number has to be the number. And that's why if we are going to submit later and have a later start date, that number has to be accurate.
Councilor Bacon?
Can I just confirm, is the total number at this point 132 million?
It's a hair under that, but yes, for all practical purposes, I would call it 132 million.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had
Yep.
the right number in my head.
And it's a little confusing because that number includes the construction cost, which is around 106, plus the soft costs. So people get confused about these numbers really easily, especially because the numbers are so big. But it's, the construction cost is 106, and the rest to get to 132 is the fees and services and all the soft stuff. I also want to make sure that people understand that in that 132 million it's a soup to nuts package, in the sense that the city is getting all the furniture and all the technology to support the school. I mean, the building is being delivered ready to go. It's not like there are other hidden costs that are come out of it. The intention of this program is to make sure that municipalities get new schools that they can use the day the schools open it, that they don't have to invest additional money.
Thank you.
Okay. So, any other thoughts, questions? I'm just going to ask a couple other questions, and as you know, I sent you all those questions, and I'm trying to be kind and not ask you too many of them today. But, so, one of the things that we didn't really get into is Veritas, and I know there's a 3-year contract. I've done some research on them in terms of their results. I'm trying to verify that the research I've done will be correct. They're estimating that there will be 500 students at the end of 2021 in their program. So two things. Number one, I'm assuming if we were to continue Veritas and that program in 2022 or 2023, whenever we had the schools, that their enrollment would all be in one school. That they wouldn't have two different principals in two different schools.
No, I mean, again, yes, they would be, but they also understand that the model was a 6 to 8 model.
Right.
Right, so that's the plan, and that's the plan we entered into this proposal with, was to have 2 6 to 8 buildings. So if they were successful, and again, it's way too early to say that at this point based on, we have no results.
Right.
We have initial parent survey and data from just last week.
I'm going on with the data from their previous
school,
Springfield
but
school, so,
again,
which
has-
I'm assuming that's probably the data you probably might have to
Right,
select
I
them
mean,
for a
it's
contract.
very positive data, but
Right.
I'd like to see what it looks
Right.
like in
No,
Holyoke.
I understand.
So, if it's successful, which is the hope, then they would operate, the one school, but it would have to be grades 6 to 8. And, that's the proposal we have, and so they've got to work within that proposal.
Okay, so I think I'm in the right line here. So in effect, one of those schools, or almost the entire, if everything worked out with them, almost entirely one of the schools would be a Veritas college prep middle school.
Right. I mean,
But
well,
they-
their model,
Right.
yes.
But I'm also assuming they would still be under the rules of the Holyoke School Department and not as a.
All right, yeah, so currently, the contract is with me as the receiver of schools, right? If at some point, whenever that is, there's no more receivership, that agreement would be with the school committee of Holyoke.
Okay. Could I ask you?
Or not be with the school committee.
Could I ask you to make arrangements for you and I to go to their Springfield school and take a look at what they do there?
If you want to take a field trip, we can take a field trip, sure.
Okay. Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. So I was under the impression that So the Veritas is there with a contract, and eventually we're learning their model, so we don't necessarily have to continue to contract with Veritas after the contract ends in order to kind of replicate some of the systems and programs that they are working to establish currently.
I mean, I think we didn't enter it with the intention necessarily to replicate their model other places. I think what we want, we want to be able to evaluate at the end of the contract is whether it's, a successful model. I would be hesitant if it was to, for us to, they would be able to demonstrate that it's been successful for the students and the families that they have, and that, I would be hesitant to then, try to, intervene with that model at that point. I mean, I would recommend at that point that they continue to operate if we deem it successful at that point. Now, whether that's something we replicate across the district, I think it's a unique model. I don't know. Again, you'd have to ask in a year or two to see, I want to talk to parents, I want to talk to students, I want to talk to staff, and I want to see the results before I comment on that.
Sure, and if I could just follow up. So when you're saying continue with the Veritas model, you mean continuing to renew a contract if they're successful. So not necessarily taking it on in-house, but really
That's correct.
Another contract. Okay.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that's clear.
That's thank you for clarifying that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? So, again, if we can make that, just let me know when we can go, and
Okay.
they could drive down there.
And others are invited to join as well.
Okay. Okay.
If you're okay with it, Chair.
Are we getting the limo service that day?
Yeah, it's not in
It's
the
not in the
budget.
budget? Yeah, I know, I had to take the
That's
bite to the last one.
transportation
So just along that same line, because I keep going back to the STEM Academy.
Yeah.
And so we built two new schools, and 550, although the capacity is in the 650s. But say 550, so if Veritas says 550, and let's say they're on the Peck campus, then I'm assuming things like STEM Academy, the dual language program, and other concepts that you are working on would all be in the other campus.
The only program we've committed to is the dual language program.
Okay.
Just based on the track record, the success, the interest, the demand, and we have enough evidence to say we've been out publicly saying we've committed to extending it at least through 8th grade. That's other than that, I would like to. That's one of the reasons I think it would be too early to make decisions about this school's going to have this program. This school's going to. STEM is only in its first year. Both schools proposed have the capacity to offer a number of STEM experiences to students. Whether there's a small school within a school, which is a common model in different places, or not, both schools are going to have opportunities for kids to engage just based on the design. You have design lab, you have project-based spaces that will allow for that. So again, it's too early to say, but I think it's something we want to look at 2 years from now, but both schools will have the capacity to offer that type of programming to kids.
Okay, I'm good for my questions for now. I told you I'd take it easy on you today.
I appreciate that.
Man of my word.
I'm losing my voice here, so.
I know you didn't. Councilor Feldman?
So I have one more for Dr. Reich then.
Sure.
The Commissioner on Education.
Yeah.
What kind of pressure can he put on this Senator Lewis and the representative, I think her name was Pish?
Yeah, I think he has influence. I don't, but I also, to Margaret's point, I'm not sure how much. I'm not overly optimistic that that there's going to be a major shift in the funding, reimbursement, or earmark. That being said, I can assure you that I've had the same conversation with the rep in follow-up, Rep Lewis and, or Rep Peisch and Senator Lewis, and the commissioner and I will have continued to have discussions about what on his end he may want to do. I know he's very interested in supporting this project. We have given him as complete a picture as we can about the financial challenges, and I know that he's in support of the plan. So I think he will do whatever he is able to do, but a lot of this is legislative, I think he will do. I think he will support in every way he possibly can, and I can assure you that I have and will continue to have conversations to try to, mitigate some of the burden that the taxpayers face. But I'm not here to tell you I'm overly optimistic that something's going to shift between now and the time the MSBA votes.
I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but is there something we could be doing to put more pressure on the commissioner to take action or to be more aggressive?
Well, I know that Chair McGee had or City Council President, not Chair, City Council President had a letter that, what's that? Oh, it's sent, okay. So I do think was an important, I think statement. I do think you certainly have every ability to contact the department, the Board of Ed, as well as the Massachusetts School Building Authority. I do think one unified message was important. I will say, I do think that, there was after the meeting we had on Thursday, there was strong acknowledgement from the representative and the senator that this is a significant issue. And I was encouraged by their, understanding of the fiscal challenges that this poses. And Rep Lewis, who obviously the Senate still hasn't gotten in session, I do believe him when he says he's going to make a strong push around the incentive points. So it wouldn't, I might suggest a follow-up with him as well, given that you were there personally to meet him, and others had a chance to meet him to say, we would appreciate strong endorsement here.
I think putting them in a very small room with windows you couldn't see and see out of, and
yes,
giving them rice and beans gave him the message.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I appreciated you pointing out that he couldn't see outside
Right.
on that day. So
Well done. Yeah.
Okay.
it's part of the strategy.
Yeah.
I'll offer a motion to table pending receipt of the other information and the language on the ballot question.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so again, obviously and now we know we got a little more time, so we'll continue to do, and we'll continue to try to find ways to put the package together that can work. And we'll come back again, not sure when now, but we'll get another schedule lined up, and we will continue to try to figure out how do we do this and do it well and do it in the most balanced way possible for the city. So I appreciate your time, and sorry about the entertainment. At my age, it's a little much for me, but I do appreciate your time. We have one other item on the agenda, and that is introduced by Councilor Michael Sullivan and David Bartley. Ordered that Section 19 of the city charter be amended to read, the mayor shall appoint 3 persons to be fire commissioners, subject to city council confirmation. Let me take that up.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So, Councilor Sullivan, you want to?
Speaks for itself. You want to just vote on it?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I will tell you, just first up, I'm always in favor of a confirmation process. I've said that when I was first on in 1976, that I think the idea of having the mayor get his or her representatives confirmed Could I just ask, if, just step outside if you want? Thank you. But I have always believed that giving the city council confirmation does balance the process, so I'm all in favor.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded to approve. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. I make a motion, we adjourn. Make a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.